r/Nosleep. Posted by u/sleepyhollow_101. Happy Halloween, witches. Final. There were two children tied and gagged in the far corner of the basement, a spaceman and a pirate. At the other end of the room there stood a man with his back to us. He was holding a young girl against the wall by her left hand. She, too, was gagged, and she was dressed like a witch. I saw the man had a knife in his hand and I realized what was happening the same second that Gail did. Holy shit. He's human, isn't he? Gail didn't bother whispering or concealing his voice. Everyone in the room turned to look at him, me included, and I glared. What? He shrugged. This'll be a piece of cake, honestly. I looked back at the man and the girl and saw that she was missing a finger on her hand, the man having sliced it off with his knife. My eyes went dark and I saw red. All right, Gail. Kill him. Gail's face went slack and his fangs peeked out from under his lips. He rocked back on his heels and then lunged towards the man. You'll notice that I haven't actually told you what the man looked like. The murderer. And there's a good reason for that. See, he was just so ordinary. When I first laid eyes on him, the scene seemed so absurd to me. He looked like a regular, middle-aged, balding salaryman. There was nothing sinister about him. Nothing that would indicate that he was fucked up. That he liked murdering children. And somehow, that scared me more than anything I've ever encountered in our world. And it's something I don't like to think about. So I watched Gail lunge at the man with something akin to relief. As Gail slammed the man into the wall, he dropped the child and she sat on the ground, sobbing behind her gag. I ran to her and grabbed her, dragging her back to the corner with her friends. I sat her down by her friends and started searching the floor frantically. I spotted her finger on the ground and grasped it, bringing it towards her. She was pale and hyperventilating, about to enter into shock. I placed her finger back in its rightful place and reached into my bag, grabbing out a handkerchief and a small blue vial. I wrapped the handkerchief around the hand and finger and breathed over it, mumbling a spell to myself as I did. I poured the blue solution onto her hand and let it soak into the cloth. I waited for a beat or two before removing it. Her finger was reattached and good as new, with nothing but a small white scar to show that it had ever been injured. She stared at it in wonder, her breathing evening out. I reached up and pulled her gag off. Hi, there. My name is Ambrosia. What's your name? I asked her. She stared at me uncertainly for a moment. Her eyes shifted behind me and I could hear the slurping, sucking sounds Gail was making. No, don't look there, look at me. Her eyes shifted back and she took a deep breath. Samantha, she said. I smiled at her. That's a beautiful name. Are you a witch, Samantha? She nodded, then shook her head. Well, I'm not a real witch. I'm just pretending. I see. You could have fooled me, you look just like a real witch. Samantha, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to face the wall and not turn around. I'm going to untie your friends and then we're going to go find your parents. How does that sound? She nodded and turned towards the wall. I slipped a switchblade out of my pocket and cut the ropes off the other children. All right, guys, let's get out of here, shall we? What is he doing to that man? Asked the pirate. I had a very good idea of what Gail was doing, but I decided to avoid that particular topic. You guys don't have to worry about that. That man isn't going to hurt you anymore, and my friend wouldn't dream of hurting you. We want to help you. That means you have to come upstairs with me, all right? The kids nodded, a little hesitant, but still trusting. I couldn't imagine still trusting someone after what they'd seen, but that's what's magical about kids. I led them upstairs. I kept them distracted while we walked by the body of their friend. As we reached the door, I turned around and knelt down. I whispered a few words in each of their ears and watched as their eyes went blank. I ushered them out the door. Your parents are down the street, waiting for you. Go on, now. They walked away in something of a daze. A quick memory wipe will do that to a person. I turned back and looked at the dead child in the foyer. Now what do I do with you? I murmured. I stared for a moment, then walked back down to the basement. Gail was kneeling over the body of the murderer, covered in his gore and blood. The man had been eviscerated, his entrails pulled out and spread around the room in disarray. His fingernails had been pulled out and shoved into his eyes. His teeth were scattered all over the floor. Dude never had his wisdom teeth taken out, I guess. He was still gurgling and choking on his own blood as I walked over. I could see that Gail had left him alive, at least for the time being. Geez, could you take any longer? I asked. The man's head jerked towards me, terror written in the lines of his face. I looked away and focused on Gale. Well, after what he did to the other kid, I wasn't going to give him a quick death. Blood dripped from Gale's lips and covered his front. His pupils were so large they overtook the color of his eyes. That happens when they feed. I'm not sure why, but I've always found it enormously attractive. But I found it even more attractive that he was showing enough self-control to make this son of a bitch suffer. Well, we need to pick up the other kid's body and get out of here, so if you could finish up. He nodded and grasped the man's face in both his hands. Straddling the body, he yanked hard and fast. The sound of his flesh distending and snapping was sickening. His body flailed a moment after the decapitation, but it didn't last very long. It was a relief when he stopped moving. I didn't want to think about the world housing that kind of human. "Help me grab the kid, will you?" We went upstairs and Gale lifted the child into his arms. He looked at me in confusion. "What do you want him for? Don't you think maybe we should just leave him here for the police to find?" I shook my head. "I can do one better." I grabbed onto Gale and transported us back to my house, my plan already in place. Remind me why we're doing this again? Gale was sitting on my back porch as I placed the child in the coffin. It's a beautiful coffin. It's made of oak and has intricate carvings all over it. More importantly, it is etched with runes, thousands of them. I shut the lid and caressed it, reading through some of the runes. I smirked a little at Gale's confusion. He was about to get a first-class show, that's for sure. "Are you gonna, I dunno, bury him or something?" I just laughed and shook my head. "Have you ever heard of necromancy?" He recoiled a little. "I thought you were a white magic witch, not a... you know." "Geez, necromancy isn't all about black magic. I mean, sure, you could do it that way, but it's a lot harder and it's pretty disgusting. You have to cook and eat a dog, and abstain from the sight of women. It's a pain. And the end result is distorted. But if you do it using white magic, well, if you're lucky, it just might work. The results aren't guaranteed, but, hey! It's better than nothing." As I spoke, I took off my jacket and rolled up my sleeves. I flexed and stretched my fingers. I didn't want to pull a muscle in my hand with what I was about to do. He looked at me like I was insane. "How come I've never heard of this?" I shrugged. "You're young. There's lots of things you don't know. Like your phone number." He flashed a smile at me and I shook my head in despair. "There's no hope for you, seriously." With that, I stretched my hands over the coffin. I began to mutter to myself, reciting the runes that graced the lid. My voice fell into an even cadence as I grew louder, the world fading around me and my concentration. On the 5th line, I brought my right hand to my left wrist, feeling for the pulse that beat just below my skin. On the 10th line, I plunged my fingernail through my skin and into my artery, letting my blood drench the lid of the coffin. It seeped into the rune carvings and disappeared while my chanting continued. I could hear other voices joining me, now, voices from different times and spaces and existences. I finally recited the final, and 20th, line, my strength failing me. I let myself fall forward on the lid of the coffin, my blood still flowing freely from my wrist as I struggled to breathe. I was losing a lot of blood very quickly. If the ritual was going to work, it had to work now. I very vaguely became aware of being lifted off the coffin lid. I realized after a moment that Gale was cradling me, my wrist lifted to his mouth. He was licking my wound which, I realized, had closed when it came in contact with his saliva. Vampire saliva has many healing properties. Not that I appreciated it at that exact moment. "Don't interfere, Gale." It was hard getting enough breath to speak. I had lost a dangerous amount of blood. "You're a goddamn idiot, Ambrosia. Are you trying to kill yourself? You know, you could pick better ways to do it than to bleed out in front of a vampire." "I have to. The ritual." "No ritual is so important that you endanger yourself like that. What the hell were you thinking?" A bit of clarity was coming back into my head. I opened my mouth to retort when he and I both heard it. A tentative knock was coming from inside the coffin. Hello? Is anybody there?" Gale's jaw dropped and I struggled out of his arms, wrenching the coffin lid open. The little boy looked at me in terror. His wounds, however, were gone and the blood had vanished from his costume. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. It was a victory I never expected. I struggled to help him out of the coffin until Gale took over. I didn't even mind, I was so elated. It worked. I couldn't believe it worked. The coffin was a family heirloom, and while I knew of its powers, I'd never tried to access them before. It takes a perfect specimen. The boy was freshly dead and had a pure, innocent soul. With anyone else, who knows if it might have worked. Furthermore, the ritual is incredibly dangerous, and many witches have died trying to complete it. That night, I easily could have been one of them. We sat the kid down and learned his name, his address. He was confused and didn't remember anything except for being out and about with his friends. He had no memories of his murder. Which was good. We didn't have to wipe his memory at all. We told him he hit his head. That we'd found him on the sidewalk and brought him to my place to see if he was okay. Gail offered to walk him home. It was getting late, now, and surely his parents were worried. And so, Gail helped me into the house and sat me down on my chair, back with my book and tea. Then he took the boy by his hand and they walked towards the front door. I noticed that Gail had already charmed Charlie and the two were getting along splendidly. Gail was good with kids, too. I noted that and filed it away. You know, for future reference. "Hey, Ambrosia, you busy next Wednesday?" he asked me, before opening the door and disappearing into the night. I might be, I might not. Why do you ask? You, me, dinner. 8 o'clock. I'll pick you up at 7:30? I thought about it, then gave him a laugh. We'll see. But no promises. He grinned and gave me a little wave as he ushered Charlie out into the darkness. I watched them go, content in the knowledge that Gail would get him safely where he needed to go. And despite my indifferent response, I was definitely going to dinner with Gail. I groaned a little and put my face in my hand, trying to fight a smile and a blush. Whoever thought that a vampire would be my type?